lots of sellers, when you're trying to run a training session, in the back of their minds or the front of their minds, they're thinking, you haven't done sales per se at this company, for example. So I think you've got to build credibility. So getting your hands dirty, doing all those jobs that sellers find tricky. As an enablement professional, I think the bare minimum is having individual relationships with the sellers. And regardless if you've got 10 sellers, 100 sellers, I think it's our responsibilities to be able to understand the sellers individually.
Just imagine if someone is getting to enablement with no sales background. And we know a lot of folks actually getting to enablement, and there's necessarily nothing wrong with that. How can enablers, the ones that are new in the seat, can build this skill set?
Yeah, a great question. And
Hey Ed, how's it going, brother?
yeah, really good. Really good. How are you?
Pretty good. Can't complain. It's a Friday. It's a beautiful day. Good to see you. Look, before we kick things off, I want to hear about your journey. Just tell me about how did you end up in sales and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, interestingly, I studied kind of classical civilization at university. So a load of dead languages, Latin, classical Greek, ancient history. But I was always interested in technology. I was always interested in, how it's changing the world, especially when, for my university career, I was kind of thinking about all things that had happened way in the past. So I was really interested in seeing how our world was changing now. So my first job at university was in sales because, well, I needed some cash to live on my own, basically, like most people do when they leave university. So I joined a telecommunications company in the kind of sales department, then kind of worked through the graduate scheme and then joined their enterprise sales team, primarily kind of providing connectivity to large businesses. And one of those businesses was JLL, a commercial real estate company. So they were one of my clients, and I love the culture, love the people there. And so when a role came up in sales enablement, I had to jump at it, right? Because it combined everything that I loved. I loved the culture of the new company, of JLL. I loved the idea of coaching salespeople as well, which I had a little bit of experience in when I was working at Verizon. And it kind of nicely fit together. It was very strange going from selling side to client side. But yeah, and then since then, I've been in sales enablement now for about 3.5 years. Moving, across from my original role was on kind of onboarding, helping new starters join the company, to now a sales enablement role. So covering deal coaching, sales methodologies, sales process, best practice, and just trying to make the sellers' lives a little bit easier. That's, in my mind, that's my mission. So, but yeah, looking forward to talking to you today. Yeah.
This is amazing, man. This is so fascinating. It sounds like you did such a killer job that your clients actually steal you from your company and now you're with them. So tell us your secret sauce. How did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit challenging because the products that we were providing was like the internet connectivity into offices. And it's a product where when it's working, like nobody really cares because it's just accepted. But when it's not there, then that's when you hear a lot about it. Luckily, our uptime was really good for this customer, so they didn't have too many problems. So I think I was just lucky. Right place, right time. Yeah.
You're talking about being lucky. I think this is one of those topics that we don't talk about a lot, and everybody's acting as if we are all superstars and superheroes and we figure everything out. But sometimes luck plays a big role in what we do. But what I do believe is that you need to be prepared. So when luck hits and the opportunity presents itself, you jump right in. And it sounds like, again, you made this cautious transition from being with one company, serving a good client, and that client opened up a new opportunity, and you were the right choice because you already built that internal relationship, and also about their use case. And that to me, I think is important as well, that you already have some background about that company.
Yeah, for sure. But also, I think there was a combination of luck. When I was in sales, I had a great manager who was a fantastic coach. And he really always emphasized the idea of what's your core purpose, and how is your current role aligned to that core purpose. So for me, I found myself when I was in sales, really gravitating towards the coaching element. When new graduates would start the company, I loved, getting them up to speed, watching them develop. And I ended up kind of like spending more time on that than my actual sales role. So I think, it's a combination of luck, but having great people around you in order to kind of recognize, what is your core objective, what's your core purpose, and kind of moving and coaching you towards that end goal. So that's something that I always try and, replicate in this role is, really finding what an individual's, what's the end goal look like? Because it's different for any seller. People think that all sellers are incentivized by commission, but from my experience, that's not the case. Some people like recognitions. Some people are kind of reputationally focused. Some people just love to learn new things. It's not always about, people think when you think salesperson, you think, right, they're just money motivated. So once you've identified that kind of purpose, right, how as an enablement like professional, how can I get them to that purpose in a smooth way? So yeah, going back to your point, I think it's a combination of luck and having great people around you. Yeah.
This is fascinating because what you're telling me while you were doing your job, you took other responsibilities because you naturally were interested in coaching. You wanted to help other people, and it feels good when even like for yourself, when you put what you learn into practice by not only just being client facing, but also helping some other folks around you get some benefits from it. That's a good feeling. That to me, it's putting the fluffy side, the things away for a minute, is that it's a skill set. I look at it this way: it's a skill set, and if you can see that it's actually working, to me, it's an achievement by itself. But it sounds like you had great coaches, as you said, and they
Yeah.
helped you navigate this shift. Did I get it correctly? Did you have like some sessions maybe with them before this transition?
Oh, many, many sessions. When you typically move from a sales role to an enablement position, your paychecks change. You move from a commissioned element to an operational element. You move from a kind of frontline sales role to a support role. Not only does your day-to-day job look very different, it's your mindset that you have to change as well. Yeah, my boss James was a fantastic coach, and we had many, many sessions talking about what the best way to kind of navigate. He was great in utilizing his network, offering his network to help as well. And yeah, so in terms of, I think that was one of the almost the biggest challenges for me was not only the kind of the day-to-day activities, what you're doing, rather than calling clients, you're calling sellers to make sure they're okay.
Mm.
But it's that mindset change. I'm not a frontline seller anymore. I'm here to support other teams, that operational function. Yeah.
This is really interesting. I want to dig into this. How did you build this mindset? I'm sure it's been a journey, but I want to hear like early days when you were switching from being a seller to an enabler.
Yeah, I think I thought when I was in sales, what would I have really liked and appreciated? Because sales is by far a really stressful job. I think we can all agree you have sometimes monthly, quarterly, annual targets, long hours, tricky customers, products are always changing. So I was thinking, reflecting back to when I was a seller, what would I have really liked from a sales enablement professional? What did I really need help with? Not only professionally, but personally. So, was it a skills perspective? Was it a kind of just coaching element? Did I just need someone in my corner, kind of just, maybe backing me up in meetings and like positioning me
Mhm.
with executives, etc. So that's kind of what I try and think about now when I'm in enablement is reflecting back to when I was in sales. What did I really struggle with? What would I've really appreciated? And I think that mindset change is because I think enablement and sales, there's tons of overlap, right? It's from a sales perspective, you're trying to motivate customers to change. Um, through lots of tactics, potentially your kind of body language, positioning. But it's very similar in enablement. You're trying to get sellers to change, that people are very stuck in their ways. and you've got to use a very similar skill set. So the skill set I think is transferable, but it's that mindset shift really of I'm not, as an enablement professional, I'm not customer facing. I'm here to really drive sellers forward. And again, going back to what I previously said around their core objective, what's their end goal that look like? It could just be like, I just want to sell to this particular client. They've got a wish list client, right? They're aspiring to sell to Apple or Amazon. How can I help them get there? How can I leverage my network or my skill set to get them there? So yeah, I think it's a kind of combination of those two things.
Very, very interesting. Look, not only you bring your sales background and sales knowledge and you apply it to your organization. To your point, your customers are changed. They're your reps. They're your internal, teammates. But I'm really curious to get your perspective of different seller types. So you have different sellers right now as your buyer personas.
Yep.
So if you could break them down, not necessarily as A player, B player, C player, but you talked about something really, really interesting. You said some people want that skill set. Some people want someone just to back them up during the meeting. Someone just want to talk to someone about some of their problems and move ahead with their lives. So I want to hear from your perspective. What are some of the themes that you see right now working with different sellers? Could you put them in a bucket as a seller persona and open up a
Yeah,
little
that's
bit about
that's
it?
that's really interesting. So before, when I was in sales, we used to subscribe to Challenger. So you had like Lone Wolf, the Challenger, the Relationship Builder. I still think that's somewhat correct, accurate, but nowadays I think it's, especially now that everyone's started working from home, I think that connectivity piece is incredibly important. So not only for sellers to be able to connect with their customers, but internally as well. Um, so if I had to kind of bucket them up, maybe I'd go with the challenger model, but typically, again, I break it down as I kind of group people together by their motivations, right? What gets people excited to do
Hmm.
their job? So typically, thinking and reflecting on our sellers and our sales teams is you have the commission guy, the sales guy that's just literally thinks of deals in paychecks. Then you've got the guy that just wants recognition, wants to elevate his status within the organization. So actually the money is less important, but it's more an exec saying that he's done a great job, or positioning that person to speak at our enablement sessions, our training sessions, as a thought leader.
Hmm.
So it could be recognition, or it could just be, look, some people just love to learn new things. They like the challenge. So keeping things fresh and different. So I tend to bucket like our sellers into those three buckets. How are they motivated, and how can ultimately that, because motivations dictate all of your actions, right? Your day to day actions. The way that you speak to your customer, or the way that you speak to other, especially support teams, myself, the proposals team, the engineering team, whatever it is. Like you can really see how their core motivations affect their day to day actions. Yeah.
I love it how how you simplify it. It's very, very important. But you made it very simple to understand. Can we do an exercise? Can
Yeah,
we
sure.
break them down? And for each seller persona, tell me how you actually plan their success, path, if you will. So what are the day-to-day activities that you might actually, do to make sure that you support each one of these sellers personas to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm thinking of the actual sellers that I work with now. So, for example, the guy that's more kind of, I guess, just deal orientated, commission oriented. Typically, the help that they need is quite almost quite light touch, quite operational, task driven. So because eventually, essentially they're trying to be as efficient as possible to get to the end goal of just closing that deal. So it's just small light touches things like for example, right, he's trying to get us as a company set up as a supplier. So they've got to go through a load of checklists, and actually going as an enablement person going, look, I'll take something off your plate. I can I can do some of the legwork and do that for you, because then ultimately that helps him get to his end goal of closing that deal and getting his commission and spending it on a nice car or something. Then I suppose the recognition piece is driving those individuals to be speakers, and leaders of our enablement sessions. So, the amount of training sessions we run is quite varied. We do it on product, process. So getting like, who we see as enablement professionals as the best in class, who is the best at, pitching this product, right? Let's get them to do a bit of training. Let's get them as a guest speaker, or helping to drive, and then eventually, after that session, going to their manager, going to their exec and going, this guy did a great job. I think he's fantastic. I think he's a talent to watch. Put him on copy and just saying, look, get him the recognition that he deserves or she deserves. Because that ultimately motivates and that helps drive that relationship between enablement and sales. And then the third one is, around how, some people just like a challenge, likes to learn new things. Again, looking at their development plan and ensuring, right, we're not just, we've not just got a schedule of product, right? We've got to keep it interesting and dynamic. Not only, right, just not doing it by calls, but how can we make it interactive? We in JLL try and use interactive tools like Mural so that they feel part of the learning as well. But also, so that it's not just them sitting at a call and just taking in information. Because again, that kind of profile, that person that likes to keep things interesting will switch off after 5-10 minutes. So, it's how do we create a dynamic and creative development plan for that individual? So again, and if you think about it, if I tried to create this kind of dynamic, or differing development plan for the guy that just wants to get the deal done, it's not going to work. So you got to fit the right kind of tool to the right profile.
I have to give you a fist bump, honestly. There we go. Because
Yeah, all
we
right,
call this a tactical enablement. So many folks, if you ask this question, they might talk about their training program. They might talk about, future plans for this different seller types. Like, yes, I'm going to promise them a management position. You talk about applying something to their day to day and enabling them now. And I think that's where sellers see the most value. And it's really personalized based on their personal desire of what success might look like. To your point, a guy who wants to buy the shiny car, you literally get your hands dirty. And I love that. It means my enablement is my partner. My enablement is not my trainer. He's a partner. He gets to this to help me get the job done and get my commission. It's all about me. Again, just being seller focused. And these are your internal, buyers, basically. Instead of being like seller focused, you're really focused on your buyers. And these are your internal buyers.
It helps build credibility. I think lots of sellers, when you're trying to run a training session, in the back of their minds or the front of their minds, they're thinking, well, you haven't done sales per se at this company, for example, or, so what do you know about delivering a pitch on this product to a customer? You haven't been in the room. So I think you've got to build credibility. So getting your hands dirty, doing all those jobs that sellers find tricky, the supply questionnaires, RFP questions, all these like very minute, small details. You've got to be able to see what they're struggling with, not just in theory, but in practice, so that then you can and then obviously then that feeds back into your training kind of strategy. So I think building credibility with the sales, otherwise you lose them very quickly. You can always tell when you're delivering a training session virtually or in person, when you start seeing people's eyes kind of glaze over, or you start seeing them go to their emails, or or the cameras start switching off. So I think that credibility piece is absolutely essential to be successful in enablement.
I'm with you 100%. And you know what? Sometimes we make things really complicated for ourselves. So we said, hey, enablers should know sales. Yes, but you don't need to necessarily go out there and sell to build that credibility. You can help the sellers achieve the sale the way
Yep.
they see fit. And I think recognizing each individual seller type and really understanding what they're trying to gain from this, the personal level, I think that's the superpower. So I have to ask another question. You work with a large organization, you have a lot of sellers. And one of the challenges that I hear from other enablers when I chat with them is that, look, I don't know every seller personally very well. Again, I'm going to challenge that, but before I shoot, they say, this is my manager's job, the leader's job to give me reality check about who they are working with. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I understand that's a challenge, but I think in the same way, a salesperson can't use the excuse, "Well, I don't know this customer, but I'm gonna go pitch to him anyway." You can't do that. That's just not acceptable, right? So, as an enablement professional, I think the bare minimum is having individual relationships with the sellers, and regardless if you've got 10 sellers, 100 sellers, I think it's our responsibilities to be able to understand the sellers individually to be able to deliver a great product. And sometimes that's just, and it doesn't have to be these in-depth relationships, but it's like small check-ins,
Hmm.
right? And do a bit of legwork. Look at the deals they're working on, see which ones have stalled. Salesforce is great at showing, right, if this deal has been in the same stage for a prolonged period of time, just sending an email, sending it or something on Chatter or on Teams, just going, "Hey, I've seen this deal. Do you need any help on it? What's the reason for it?" And then that way you can be super specific, but it's relatively light touch. You don't have to have these, in depth, maybe hour-long coaching sessions, for every single person, because a lot of people don't want that or need that. It's just making sure that you're building relationships. You know, whether it's a 2-minute check-in, or an email, or if it's an hour long. Some people, also like myself, I love coaching sessions, both delivering them but also receiving them. But not everyone is like that. I think regardless of the number of your sellers, I think that there's ways to build those relationships on an individual basis, because technology is there now. I think it's at our fingertips. Like we just need to use it in the appropriate manner, as a correct tool, um, to be able to build those relationships.
Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails? These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. If you don't know to your point, your buyers, the people that you are serving and helping in an individual level, we don't even we don't even have that level of understanding about our seller persona that we just discussed. How do I know what Ed wants even? Like, maybe I bug him by doing these light touches. Maybe he wants that one, long 1 hour conversation as coaching session, or maybe he gets annoyed if I offer that. So you need that one-on-one relationship. I want to dig into your process. Like, it sounds like you already have a framework, or at least a system that lets you actually check the CRM, observe, something. It's just like our sellers, let's just go see and check Sales Navigator, see what's changing in the industry. Let's see what's going on with this, specific prospect. How do you actually walk through this process to gather some information, so when you do your outreach to your sellers, it's actually timely and it makes sense to them?
Yeah, I think again, and my list might be different from another person's list, but again, I always like having a kind of list of red flags, especially on deals. For example, if the deal has stalled out, if there's only one customer contact underneath the opportunity, looking for these like small clues. And you can run reports so that I get automatically updated. So, for example, if a deal has spent 90 to 100 days at negotiation stage, then you're going, okay, well, something's maybe do we need to, go to legal and ask what's going on, and leverage a little bit of the relationship there to be like, can we expedite this a bit? Or, if there's not a customer, if there's only one customer contact, going to the seller and going, this looks like you're single threaded on this deal, right? There's a single point of failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, kind of challenging their contact strategy a bit? So having a list of like red flags, I think is absolutely important. And just running those reports on a either weekly basis or once every 2 weeks, just to see the health of that pipeline. Because individual sellers, they're all sellers are optimists. Like, you can't be a seller without being optimistic. They think every deal is going to close on time. They think their customers are going to go, oh, let's bump up the price if anything. Of course, that's not the case, but you got to be optimistic. But when they're in the trenches, like, because they're so optimistic, they don't have that ability to sometimes self reflect and challenge themselves. So from my experience, lots of sellers are actually pretty open to, if you ask a few questions,
Mm-hmm.
It either stands up to that kind of criticism or not. The deal, and if the deal isn't, then they've got a little bit more work to do. But all you're doing is helping that kind of health of the pipeline. So yeah, I would say, deals stalling out, lack of customer contact. We also use a number of tools. So the last time, either if you've got one customer contact or the last time that customer emailed or called you, if that's been more than a few weeks, a lot can change on a deal in a week, let alone 2 weeks. So if you haven't talked to your customer in 2 to 3 weeks, who knows what your competitors are doing, right? They're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to get in on this deal, on this budget. So yeah, I would say, think about how long your deal has been at the current stage, how many customer contacts you've got, when was the last time you spoke to them. And I think that's normally I'm sure I've got like a kind of a Salesforce list, but off the top of my head, those are 3 good ones, like big red flags.
This is really cool because what I'm hearing is you really focus on revenue. Like, I go on CRM, I see what's not working, I have a list of red flags, and I talk about specific deals. You talk about multi-threading. You're talking about like staying in one, let's say, stage for a longer than usual, and then you reach out to people and try to help. Now, CRM is great. Of course, we need somewhere to get data. And things are getting much better right now with AI and tools that we have with automations. We can get the truth faster and better. But sometimes there are deeper issues as of why people are not performing at their best. And this is not something that you can easily figure out through reports or dashboards. You mentioned about coaching a lot, and some people might be resistant toward, even coaching and opening up about their issues, right? How do you identify these patterns? Because you cannot easily get this from CRM.
Yeah, that's a
Tell me.
fantastic question. I think that question actually just goes straight to the core of enablement. Like, what, as enablers, how do we help the people that don't want help? And that's like a challenge that we have to deal with on a daily basis. But I think, trends are great. So looking at, for example, if a seller is trending a certain way, right, whether it's deal length, deal size, etc., as soon as they fall off that trend, then just, checking in with them, and again, some people, I would argue that no one is uncoachable. I just think you have to be incredibly flexible about the way some people, are very open to the fact that you go, oh, it'd be great to have a coaching conversation with you. And they go, yeah, it'd be fantastic. Other people, as soon as they hear the word coaching, they're like, no thanks, I'm too
Something is
experienced.
off.
Yeah, they just kind of start backing away. So when we describe like a coaching type conversation, it doesn't have to be like a formal, right, asking questions and teasing out the answers and having that person self-reflect. I think it can be, right, out of interest, for the, say, for example, a seller has been doing things a certain way for a very long time. Those tend to be the people that tend to be most hesitant for coaching, that are a bit kind of stuck in their ways. It's just going, look, you've been doing this for a certain amount of time. with these deals, and you've got X result, right? And again, using the CRM data to not create the arguments, but back up your arguments. You've got to create the argument and then find the data
Mm-hmm.
to support it. So saying, look, you've been trending for, X amount for this amount of time, right? And recently your deal size has been dipping a bit. Why do you think that is? And have them think critically. Because I think, again, part of your question was around, especially around the CRMs being so intelligent these days. So, yeah, I think it's that piece of, right, understanding how long a seller has been trending at for, what's the change, and what has caused that change.
This is correct, and this is a very good approach, but I want to challenge you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is resistant, because I've seen this, I had to deal with it. I was maybe at some point this way because I was maybe dealing with something really major in my life. When you get the resistant, all the, critical thinking, all the logic, everything is closed. Like we're talking emotions. As someone who's been in the seat for 15 years and at some point maybe high performed and right now is struggling, like I appreciate you coming through the enablement lens and look at the reports. I'm doing my part. It's moving. I'm working on it. I heard these phrases. So
Yeah.
I want to hear your approach to this. Like how do you navigate this situation?
Well, I think like you almost like touch on it. I think timing is really important. Once you've been out of sales for a certain amount of time, the timing of things. So I forget, sometimes I forget being when you're in sales and you've got a monthly target. I cannot describe to you when I was in sales like how aware I was of where we were in the month. I always knew the date. Like I always knew, right, I'm towards the beginning of a month, or like I know it's the fact it's the last week of the month. But a lot, like especially now in enablement, obviously because I'm not, I don't have a monthly target. It's easy to forget. These these times or these waves of where it's more stressful as a seller, end of quarter, and even like December, right, is always, we run calendar. So December is always incredibly stressful time of year. So I'm not doing them a favor if I'm like, let's have a load of coaching conversations middle of December. That's a good way to make a lot of enemies. So I think timing is really important. Having a high level of empathy and EQ. I know, like, EQ and empathy has become incredibly fashionable in the corporate world recently, but I'm a big believer that, that at the end of the day, to have better communication styles and communication and conversations and coaching conversations, you have to empathize with that individual. What are they going through, right? Where are they on their number? A lot of time, if they're a
Mhm.
lot, it's ironic, right? Sometimes the people that are most behind their number and probably need the most amount of coaching are sometimes the most hesitant, the most resistant to coaching. So I think, making sure that you've got the timing right, making sure that you're hitting on the right notes. If is this a are we talking like a really deep problem? Is this person's ability to do this job at risk? Or is it just, look, they don't understand the product and they just need a little bit more coaching on a specific, tiny piece of the puzzle, and then it all kind of click. So I think, to answer your question, I think having just that high level of empathy or EQ when you're approaching a seller is vital. And I think that's the way that you can unlock some of those resistant sellers.
I love it. Look, you as a seller naturally, again, I think you perform as a seller for a number of years. So you've been in the seat, you naturally build that ability to run discovery calls, right? Because this is what you do as a seller. So I think you brought that to enablement with you. The fact that you can ask those good questions to surface the actual problem and root cause of it and then see how you can fix. Just imagine if someone is getting to enablement with no sales background. And we know a lot of folks actually getting to enablement, and there's necessarily nothing wrong with that. How can they actually build this ability to run it like a discovery call? Because this requires, to me, practice. This requires a lot of practice. It's not that I just dump a bunch of questions and I'm going to figure out what to do. Having that curiosity, to your point, EQ, empathy, these are not fluffy words in a practical sense. You need to actually experience it when people are closed off and they don't talk or they don't share any information whatsoever, how to navigate that. How can enablers, the ones that are new in the seat, can build this skill set?
Yeah, a great question, and I would argue that you almost answered it yourself, right? I think experience. Just try, get out there and have as many conversations with as many sellers to be able to really drive that value, and again that credibility piece that I spoke about earlier. So even if you don't have that kind of, there's a bit of things that you can study, how to ask coaching questions, the difference between a closed question and an open-ended question. How are you structuring your questions, that kind of the academic piece. But if I said to you, like, right, read this book on how to ask great questions, all right, now go out and sell this
Good luck.
incredibly complicated software. The two things are very different, right? And I would challenge anyone, like, I don't think anyone starts like a sales career or an enablement career day one and they're fantastic at it. There is a learning process, there is a learning curve. And I think for enablement, I think that piece is experiential learning, getting out and actually experiencing, one, what sellers are struggling with, but then also how to speak to sellers. What are they interested in? And again, I think if you compare salespeople to any other function in the business, they're of a certain breed, right? There's, you layer in a bit of ego as well. There's a competitive element, especially around numbers and
Mhm.
commission, right? Which you don't get in other functions. So the only way that you can experience that is get amongst it. Get out and speak to sellers, sales managers, sales directors. Understand ultimately how do they talk? What kind of terminology do they use? And again, in sales, I'm sure you're very familiar with, like things like mirroring, right? How do I to build this relationship? How can I, you know, speak like the way they speak, use the words they do, use the same kind of hand gestures, etc. Um, so I think if you're an enablement professional, you don't have sales, that's absolutely fine. There's lots of ways to win, but I would just recommend you go out and ultimately, one, learn the bit of the theory, but then two, go out and practice. It's like a sport, right? You don't just turn up on game day. You got to put in the time, put in the practice, and I'm sure I think I would actually say, like, having different backgrounds in enablement. In our team, we've got people that had sales backgrounds, some that didn't, came from learning development, came from marketing. You know, I think that's in an ideal world, you'd want that blend because then everyone's bringing something different to the table, right? And different people will be connecting with different sellers. A salesperson that, especially, I'm quite fortunate. I'm a team of one here in EMEA, but I'm part of a global team, so I can bounce ideas off my colleagues. Um, so if you are part of that of a kind of enablement team, try and learn from others as well. Yeah. So a combination of those
That's a
things, I think.
great perspective. I love it. This is a great perspective. Look, if you have marketing background, if you have learning and development background, I have sales background, that builds a super, powerful team rather than if everybody's the same. Like it's great. Yes, so you understand sales, I understand sales. But to your point, people click with different personalities, different background, different needs. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. And while you were saying this, I actually remembered something from the past. What was a rep? We had a new sales enablement specialist join the team, and I really loved her approach. Yes, she was reading a lot. She was trying to get close to the team. One thing that she was doing during the meetings, and I asked other people the same pattern, she was very authentic about who she was. So, look, I'm new in the seat. I'm trying to learn. I want to be a friend. Can you teach me whatever you know? And simple, things, simple moves, you build that relationship. And most people, at least if you have good culture, they want to help. And partnering up with, sellers, maybe again, out of 100, only 10, 20, say yes and try to help. And maybe two, three become really close to you because they have that personality that they want to support and help others. And then you honestly have a better shot at, ramping up faster in your role. I think that's a good approach. Just to be transparent. Look, I'm new into this. That's okay. I don't need to show feathers. And yeah, that's my
Yeah,
reality.
and I think I'd challenge any person, I guess, that if someone was coming to you and saying, "I'm here to help. I'm here to make your life easier, better, more efficient, you got to be pretty cold to be like, no, I don't want any of that. So I think if you approach it like that, if someone came to me and said, "Hey Ed, I'm going to help you, you know, track your Monday board," because I'm dreadful at like tracking like workflows. But so if someone was like, "I'm going to come and help you manage those workflows," I'd bite their hand off. I'd go, "Yeah, please get in here." I'm sure my manager would like that as well. But yeah, so I think, like you said, be authentic, and reiterate what you do. What are we here to do? We're here to help, ultimately remove obstacles, smooth things out. And I think most sellers, I'll challenge most sellers, I think would appreciate that.
There we go. So we can finish it on a high note. Just be helpful. Simple as that. All
Yeah,
right.
and have a good time doing it. I think, I personally think sales and sales enablement is it's a fantastic industry to be in. We're doing different things on a daily basis. We're helping people, which I think I'm a big believer in. Helping others is a key not only to a profession, like a happy professional life, but a happy life in general. So I think we're all, very fortunate to be in this role. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ed, I appreciate you. I really enjoyed this conversation. And is there anything else you wanted to add before we say goodbye?
No, I think, whoever's watching as an enablement professional, keep changing the world, make other people happy. I think if you can do that, then, it's a pretty good life. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, guys. Until next time. Bye for now.